Picture this. You are standing 900 feet below the surface of the Earth in a tunnel so hot the air itself feels like it has weight. Your suit is packed with ice. Your mask is feeding you cold air because your own lungs cannot survive what is waiting just a few meters ahead. The temperature outside your suit is close to 140 degrees Fahrenheit. The humidity is nearly 100%. And a doctor standing beside you has already warned that you have less than 20 minutes before your body starts to shut down. And yet you keep walking forward because what is waiting in the dark ahead of you is something almost nobody on this planet has ever laid eyes on. Massive crystal beams, some longer than a city bus, growing out of solid rock like the ribs of some sleeping giant. This is not a movie set. This is not science fiction. This is a real place, buried beneath a working mine in northern Mexico, and for a few short years, it was one of the strangest and most beautiful places human beings had ever found beneath their own feet. By the end of this video, you are going to understand exactly how something like this can exist, why it almost killed the people who discovered it, what scientists found hiding inside those crystals that changed the way we think about life itself, and why right now, as you watch this, that entire chamber is sitting underwater again, sealed away from the world, possibly forever. So if strange, real places that sound made up but aren't all your kind of thing, you are exactly where you need to be. Let's go down. To understand how something this strange could form underground, you first have to understand the place it happened. Tucked into the desert hills of Chihuahua in northern Mexico sits a town called Naica. It is small, dusty, and for most of its history, almost nobody outside the region had ever heard of it. What put Naica on the map was not crystals at all. It was lead, zinc, and silver. Deep beneath the town sits one of the richest ore deposits in that part of the world. And for generations, mining companies have been drilling down into the earth, chasing veins of metal that have made this one of the most productive mines in Mexico. Miners here do not work in some quiet, romantic version of mining you might picture in a movie. They work in heat, in noise, in tunnels that stretch on for miles, following the same instinct that has driven people underground for thousands of years. There is something valuable down there, and somebody has to go get it. Over the decades, as the mining operation pushed deeper and deeper beneath the surface, the miners kept running into something unusual. Every so often, a new tunnel would break through into a small open pocket, and inside that pocket would be crystals. Not huge ones, but noticeably large, clear, blade-like formations growing out of the rock walls. One particular chamber, found decades earlier, became famous among collectors and geologists for crystals large enough to walk among, almost like a crystal-lined room. It was beautiful, it was strange, and at the time, nobody fully understood why it was happening here and almost nowhere else on Earth. But it was nothing compared to what was waiting just a little deeper. In the year 2000, two brothers working for the mine were drilling a new tunnel roughly 1,000 feet below the surface. This was routine work. They were not looking for anything except more ore. But as they broke through into a new cavity, something stopped them in their tracks. Beyond the hole they had just cut sat a chamber, unlike anything either of them had ever seen, or that almost anyone alive had ever seen. Massive translucent beams of crystal crossed the room in every direction. Some of them estimated to stretch over 30 feet long and weigh several tons each. The air was thick with heat, the ground was unstable, and the light from their headlamps scattered and bounced off the crystal surfaces in a way that made the entire chamber look like it was glowing from within. Accounts from that time describe the discovery as something closer to stepping into a dream than into a mine shaft, a place that did not feel like it belonged underground at all. Word of the discovery moved quickly through the mining company and then through the scientific community. Geologists were brought in almost immediately, and what they found only deepened the mystery. These were not ordinary crystals. They were selenite, a clear form of the mineral gypsum. And while small selenite crystals are fairly common around the world, what made this chamber different was scale. Most crystals you might find in a cave or a rock shop measure inches. These measured feet. Some measured tens of feet. To grow a crystal that large in nature without any human interference, you need something extremely rare, an enormous amount of time, combined with almost perfectly stable conditions. And that combination is almost never found in nature, because nature does not usually hold still for that long. So scientists set out to answer the obvious question: how does a crystal grow to the size of a tree trunk? The answer, it turns out, comes down to patience on a scale that is almost impossible for a human mind to truly grasp. Deep beneath Naica sits a magma chamber, a body of molten rock that has been slowly cooling for an extremely long time. As it cools, it releases heat into the groundwater above it, and that water becomes saturated with dissolved minerals, including calcium sulfate, the building block of gypsum. Under most conditions, water like this would either be too hot or too cool for selenite to form properly. But in this particular chamber, researchers found something remarkable. The water sat at almost exactly the precise temperature, somewhere around 136 degrees Fahrenheit. That allows calcium sulfate to convert into selenite incredibly slowly instead of rapidly. And that temperature did not just hold for a few years or a few centuries. According to the geologists who studied it, conditions in that chamber appear to have remained remarkably stable for several 100,000 years. Think about what that actually means. While early humans were still figuring out how to control fire, while entire species were rising and going extinct on the surface above. While ice ages came and went, those crystals were sitting in the dark in total stillness, growing by fractions of an inch at a time. No earthquakes disturbed them enough to fracture their structure. No major shifts in temperature interrupted their growth. They simply had time, more time than almost anything else on the surface of this planet ever gets, and they used every bit of it. By the time human beings finally broke through the wall into that chamber, they were not just looking at minerals, they were looking at a very rare physical record of geological patience frozen in crystal form. But here is where the story stops being only about beauty and starts being about danger, because that same heat that made the crystals possible also made the chamber one of the most hostile environments a human being could walk into. Air temperature inside the cave regularly sat around 136 degrees Fahrenheit, combined with humidity close to 99 or 100%. To put that in perspective, your body cools itself primarily through sweat evaporating off your skin. In a place that hot and that humid, sweat simply cannot evaporate. Your own cooling system stops working completely. Doctors who studied conditions in the cave found that an unprotected person could begin suffering heat stroke, organ stress, and potentially fatal overheating in well under 30 minutes, in some conditions in as little as 10. So if scientists wanted to study this place properly, they could not just walk in with a flashlight and a notebook. They needed something closer to spacesuits. Researchers eventually developed special cooling suits, packed with ice and chilled gel packs, paired with respirators that fed in cool air, because breathing in the natural cave air at that temperature could damage the lungs directly. Even with all of that protection, most expeditions into the deepest part of the chamber were limited to short windows, often somewhere between 20 and 45 minutes at a time, before researchers had to retreat back toward cooler tunnels to avoid heat injury. Several explorers later described moments of disorientation and mild hallucination during their time inside, a known risk of operating in extreme heat for extended periods, even with protective gear. This was not a casual tourist cave. This was one of the most physically punishing research environments on the planet, hidden behind an ordinary mining tunnel in the middle of the desert. And if you are thinking, at this point, that giant glowing crystals and near-lethal heat is already enough for one place to handle, the story is about to take a turn that genuinely surprised the scientific world. Because crystals like these do not just grow in empty space. As they form, tiny pockets of the original water can become sealed inside the crystal itself, trapped in place as the mineral grows around them, almost like a bubble frozen inside ice. These are called fluid inclusions, and inside Naica's crystals, they had been sealed shut for an extraordinarily long time when researchers, including microbiologists working with NASA-affiliated teams, carefully extracted samples of that ancient trapped fluid. They were not expecting to find much of anything alive. Instead, they found microorganisms. Not fossils, not traces, living microbial life, sealed inside those fluid pockets that under laboratory conditions could be revived and coaxed back into activity. Let that sit for a second. Because this is the part of the story that pushed Naica from being a geological curiosity into something astrobiologists across the world started paying very close attention to. These were not organisms that simply survived in the cave's harsh conditions the way some bacteria do on the surface of hot springs. These were organisms that had been completely cut off from sunlight, completely cut off from the surface world, sealed in mineral, trapped water for what researchers estimated could be tens of thousands of years or more, some studies suggesting timescales even longer than that, though that exact age remains a subject of genuine scientific debate. Some of these microbes appear to survive not through sunlight or oxygen, the way most familiar life does, but through chemical reactions involving minerals like iron and manganese, essentially eating rock chemistry to stay alive in total darkness. For scientists studying the possibility of life beyond Earth, this was enormous. If microscopic organisms could remain dormant, sealed away from light, water exchange, and surface conditions for that long and still be capable of reactivating, it meant that life might be far more resilient and far more adaptable to extreme environments than previously assumed. Suddenly, researchers studying Naica weren't just thinking about Mexico. They were thinking about Mars, about the icy subsurface oceans of moons like Europa, about any place in our solar system where liquid water might exist beneath a frozen or rocky crust, hidden away from sunlight exactly the way Naica's water had been hidden for hundreds of thousands of years. A mining tunnel in the Mexican desert had quietly become one of the most studied analogs for extraterrestrial life on the entire planet. Now, if you are starting to get pulled into stories like this, places on our own planet that sound more like science fiction than reality, this is genuinely the kind of thing this channel exists to dig into. So if that's your kind of curiosity, sticking around and subscribing means you won't miss the next one of these. Because trust me, what's coming in the back half of this story is just as wild as what you've heard so far. Because here is the part of the Naica story that almost nobody outside of geology circles knows about, and it is, in many ways, the most haunting part of the entire thing. That cave was never naturally dry. For most of its existence, that entire chamber, crystals and all, was completely submerged underwater, fed by the same mineral-rich groundwater that built the crystals in the first place. The only reason human beings were ever able to walk through it at all is because the mining company operating Naica was continuously pumping enormous volumes of water out of the surrounding tunnels day after day, year after year, to keep the lower levels of the mine accessible for ore extraction. Those pumps were not running for the crystals. They were running for silver, lead, and zinc. The fact that one of a kind natural wonder happened to become accessible as a side effect of industrial mining was, in a very real sense, an accident of economics. And accidents of economics do not last forever. As the years went on, the mining operation continued pushing toward different, deeper sections of the mountain in search of new ore deposits, and the cost of continuing to pump out that particular section of the mine purely to keep a crystal chamber dry stopped making financial sense for the company running it. Around 2015, the pumps keeping that section dry were shut down slowly without any dramatic flooding or sudden collapse. The groundwater that had been held back for years began returning to where it had always been, tunnel by tunnel. The water crept back in, and the cave that had stunned scientists, astrobiologists, and photographers from around the world began disappearing beneath the surface of its own mineral-rich water once again. Today, that chamber, with its towering crystal beams, sits completely submerged, exactly the way it had for hundreds of thousands of years before two miners ever cut a hole into its wall. It is, as far as researchers can tell, almost certainly inaccessible to people now, possibly permanently, unless mining operations or scientific interest in the area shift again in the future. Which means that for a window of roughly 15 years, in the entire multi-million-year history of this formation, a small number of human beings were allowed to walk among something the rest of our species may never get the chance to see firsthand again. And somewhere in the recordings, photographs and scientific papers from that brief window is essentially all that remains of direct human contact with that place. There is something strange and a little humbling about a story like this. We talk a lot about discovery as though is the end of the story, the moment something gets found and then simply belongs to us from that point forward. But Naica is a reminder that discovery can be temporary. The crystals are not gone. They have not stopped growing somewhere beneath that mountain, in total darkness, under tons of mineral, saturated water. Those same slow chemical processes that built beams the size of trees over hundreds of thousands of years are very likely still happening right now, completely indifferent to whether anyone is there to see it or not. The cave does not need an audience to keep existing. It only briefly had one. What makes this kind of story worth sitting with, I think, is what it says about the planet we live on. We tend to assume that we have a fairly complete picture of Earth at this point. Satellites have mapped every coastline, every mountain range, every visible inch of the surface. But what Naica shows is that some of the most extraordinary things on this planet are not hiding in some unexplored jungle or remote ocean trench. They can be sitting directly beneath an active industrial site behind an ordinary wall of rock, waiting for someone to simply drill in the right direction at the right time. And when conditions are stable enough, patient enough, and isolated enough, the Earth is capable of building things on a timescale that makes almost all of human history look like a single brief flicker. So if you take one thing away from this video, let it be this. Somewhere beneath your feet right now, wherever you happen to be watching this from. There are processes happening in total darkness that have been running for far longer than anyone has been alive to witness them. And some of them may never be seen by human eyes at all. Naica is proof that those processes are real, because for a short time, we got to walk inside one. If stories like this, real places stranger than fiction, hidden somewhere on our own planet, are the kind of thing you want more of, this channel is going to keep digging into them. So consider subscribing if you haven't already, and let me know in the comments which underground wonder you think we should explore next. Because honestly, Naica is far from the strangest place hiding beneath the surface of this planet. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.